Morning. Today we are going to host Mr. Onur Sultan, who is the political violence and communication expert in Beyond the Horizon International Strategic Studies Group. Okay. Good morning. Today we are going to host. He is an expert in Beyond Horizon International Strategic Studies Group, which is a European Parliament-approved major think tank based on Brussels, Belgium. Mr. Sultan finished his master's degree in Naval Postgraduate School in California, US, on security studies of the Middle East. He worked in several official positions, and now he is a PhD researcher in Belgium on ISIS strategic communication and propaganda. Today, Mr. Sultan will address the situation in Yemen civil war, background of the conflict, actors, and the course of events. As of now, you know, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen remains the worst in the world, warns United Nations. Let's welcome Mr. Sultan for his precious evaluations on Yemen civil war.
Hi, everyone. Issa made a very good introduction about me, and I'm really thankful for this. And it's an honor to address you today. For me, it's a good opportunity. And I'm going to talk about Yemen, as you said. The structure in my mind is like, I'm going to, first of all, give you a background on the crisis in Yemen, because without knowing the history behind the crisis that we see now, it's really not possible to really understand what's going on, actually. And when you read news and reports about what happens in Yemen on a weekly basis, then you might be a little bit in the dark, because there are many things that are carried from very behind, like from very back, and we need to go and find the roots in its history in order to better understand. So this is Yemen, as you see. Yemen is located in the Gulf region, and it controls this. Can you see my pointer on the? Okay, that's fine. So as you see, its strategic location makes it an important place in the globe. It sits on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which controls the Red Sea, and the sea transfer of the petroleum oil from Saudi Arabia flows from here. And at the same time, just at the Horn of Africa, there's the Socotra Island, which is a part of Yemen and also a part of World Heritage because of its flora. And as such, Yemen is an important country, which everybody is really eyeing on. And this is a kind of more explicit picture or map of Yemen. And let's go to the history. So we need to understand that the Yemen that we see today, by history, was not there until 1990s. Before that, there were two kind of separated Yemen republics. One Yemen Arab Republic in the north, and in the south and to the east, People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. And these came together in 1990 to make one united Republic of Yemen. But it was a hasty kind of movement, and there was not clear kind of understanding or agreement on how to do this and what would be the mechanism in the afterwards. So immediately after this 1990s unification, there were the people in the south felt that there was a kind of imbalance, first of all, and at the same time a kind of intimidation from north. The imbalance comes from that 3/4 of the resources remain in south, whereas 1/4 of the population lives in south. And the same, exactly the opposite, 1/4 of the resources are located in the north, whereas population-wise, 3/4 of Yemen lives in north. So immediately after this unification, we see that Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president of the time, started to control the kind of military apparatus in the state and try to impose North's domination onto South also. So this kind of unrest continued until 1994, and as a following, there was a civil war between the two sides. And after 3 months of fight, the North won the war, and North started to become more dominant because immediately after the civil war, about 20,000 of officers and military personnel coming from South were sacked, and many people were sent to Saudi Arabia and so as refugees, and they had to kind of flee the country. And we start to see a more kind of systematic domination of North over South. And when we fast forward to 2003, we see that the US made an operation in Iraq, and this caused a little bit unrest in the Zaydi kind of in the north of the country, because this part of the country was mainly populated by Zaydis, which is an important sect in Yemen. So the Zaydis, they think that they come from the lineage of the Prophet, and they think that the leadership should be carried out by someone who is sharing that lineage. So from the very kind of earlier times, they were already against the Saudi government because they were not direct descendants of this prophet's lineage. But at the same time, because of the support that Yemen and Saudi Arabia gave to the US in its war against Iraq, they started to kind of a protest movement in Yemen. And at the head of this movement was Hussein al-Houthi. And they started to also voice their own concerns regarding political, social, and economical backwardness, which they thought was systematically executed by this state, by the government. And they were thinking that by coming together, like coming close to Saudi Arabia, the government was trying to dilute their own kind of version of Islam, and they thought this they were under threat. And quickly, this Salih he blamed them to try to restore a Zaydi imamate. This Zaydi imamate was before 1962. There was earlier, under Ottoman rule, a Zaydi imamate that was ruling in the northern Yemen. And after a kind of civil war between 62 and 67, by the help of Russians and Egyptians, the Zaydi imamate was kind of sacked or brought down. And so quickly, Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president of the time, started a kind of harsh reaction to this, and tried to garner external support for his initiative to silence the Houthis, or Zaydis at the time. And he sided with tribal forces and Saudi Arabia. Basically, this, as they call it, the Sada Wars that started in 2004 and ended in 2010. In 6 years, there were kind of 6 iterations of this war. And in each time, Ali Abdullah Saleh was able to garner support from either within the state or from outside, from US and from Saudi Arabia. We need to understand this character of Ali Abdullah Saleh. He is a person who has tried to control the whole statecraft with his relatives, and he has kind of very quickly and very often made agreements with different power centers within the state, brokered and promised something, and this way he had a kind of network that through which he controlled the whole state. There is an American writer, Robert Ward, and he had an interview with him. And please read it on the left side of the screen. You're going to see this is how he explains what Salih does. He says Salih lasted only because he learned how to trade on Yemen's misfortunes and amplify them. Even Al-Qaeda became a cash cow for Mr. Saleh, drawing American military help and training. He thrived on Yemen's tribal conflicts, setting enemies against each other and expertly steering the pot. He called this technique tawazun, the Arabic word for balancing, and he was proud of it. So we are talking about a state which has not one but multi-layered power structures within. You have tribes, you have central government, you have like the parts of the country that doesn't have any kind of service or security that is provided by the state, where like local power structures are dominant, and you have like extensions of the central powers into the local or rural zones, which are given not on the basis of expertise, but based on allegiance kind of linkages with the government. And this person, Ali Abdullah Saleh, the earlier president of Yemen, was very skillful to use all these kind of tools that were available to him to extend his power and control over the state and the country. So, yes, and in 2011, you're going to remember there was this Arab Spring protest all over the Middle East, and Yemen was not spared. Yemen also had its own share. And starting from January 22, 2011, people came out on the streets and started to protest against government, and Saleh was asked to resign, basically. But he didn't resign. And there were bloody protests. The military was forced to harshly suppress these protests, and many generals, they just refused to suppress this movement like with harshness, with strictness, and so they had to kind of resign from their positions. But this lasted until 23rd of November, and in the 23rd of November, Salih resigned with an agreement. With this agreement that was brought together by the Gulf countries, he was given a kind of immunity from the crimes that he committed against the people during this protest, because there were many that were killed. But in exchange, he resigned, and his vice president and the current president Hadi took over the job from him. So on 21st of February, just like 3 months later, they decided to conduct the elections, and the Houthis formed a new party, Al Ummah Party, meaning the nation. And the Southern secessionists, they refused to, they decided to block the elections. And Hadi won the elections by 99% of the votes, which until today, that is the only election that was made, and which is the source of legitimacy, his legitimacy and his governance. And he was to head a national dialogue to draft an inclusive constitution based on a federal system. What this commission came up was to offer a kind of six states federal government, 4 states in the north and 2 states in south, but nobody was happy about the decision that was taken by this national dialogue group. And also when he came to power, he had 3 hardcore tasks. First of all, there was a broken economy that he had to fix. And he had to provide security and services. I'm not sure if you remember, but at those times there was a real Al-Qaeda in Arabic Peninsula threat, AKAP. And in 2011, they basically declared the republic in 2011 within the state, Islamic Emirate of Yemen. And they afterwards, I don't know, I mean, it's not so clear, but they handed over the governance to the locals later on. And in 2012, they did the same thing. So twice there was built a state within the state with the name of Islamic Emirate, built by AKAP. And after this taste and this unrest between Houthis and the government, and this solution didn't fit this Houthis agenda, they made a coalition with Saleh. So the main kind of reason for this coalition is that when we're talking about Houthis, we talk about a group of people who are skillful in fighting, who have like weapons, who have a limited a kind of ability to coordinate and systematically do something. But they don't have tradition of governing a state. They don't have this tradition or experience of how governance works and so, and also they don't have a network. So what they did is, as I told you before, Saleh's family and linkages were very strong within the military. So they tried to come up together with him, form a kind of coalition, and go through there. For Saleh, the motivation was that he was asked to resign from his presidency role. He quickly welcomed this offer, and they made a coalition. On 18th of August 2014, there was full subsidy protest in Sana'a, the capital at the time, and Prime Minister resigned as a result, and Hadi ousted from the party because Hadi and Saleh were from the same party. He was the one was the vice president, and the other one was the president at the time. And Saleh had stepped down, and Hadi had came down. So he was also kind of asked to leave Sana'a at the time. Quickly after taking control of Sana'a, Houthis dissolved the parliament, and by 24th of March 2015, Hadi sent a letter to the heads of governments in the Gulf region, asking them to help him to overcome the coup that was started by the Houthis. For the Gulf countries, the Houthis' control and perception of Houthis as a Shiite group was a big threat, because they didn't, if you know, like if we go to the map, you're going to see, for them, Iran is the greatest threat. So if you see and look at this geography, you're going to see that the tension that you already know that exists here in the Persian Gulf, or as they call it, the Arabian Gulf, is already clear. But in 2011, when this event started, there were like strict, very harsh protests in Bahrain, and the Gulf countries had to come in and intervene in order to suppress the protest movements here, because there's a major Shiite population in Bahrain, which is against the government and the king's family and so. And the Qatar has a somewhat positive attitude towards Iran, and they thought like Iran was trying to kind of form a crescent of a Shiite crescent here, and it was a big threat for him. They were really scared. So if you think like, look from here, you have Lebanon, which is a major Shiite population. Syria is the same, like the Shiites are form a very major proportion of the at least they form a major component of the governance, Assad and his family. In Iraq, they were like that because after the US invasion in Iraq, the government changed and there was a Shiite government that was ruling. And so you see here, you form a kind of a crescent here. So Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, then you take this crescent back to here, Bahrain, somewhat, as I said, Qatar, and here in southern Saudi Arabia, there's a proportion of Shiite population, and then Yemen. So you make a kind of full, a half kind of crescent, a Shiite crescent, and this is not good for them. They were not happy. So what happened is UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and several other countries said they're going to join this, especially Sudan. They're going to join this coalition to encounter Houthis and roll them back. And as they promised, they first stopped the advance of Houthis and they rolled them back to initial kind of lines that they started. And there was an UN Security Council resolution 2216, which foresaw sanctions on individuals undermining stability of Yemen, an arms embargo against Houthi Saleh forces, and stipulating a retreat from areas seized and handover of weapons by the Houthis. As we're discussing all these things, but although this initial kind of success in the operations, the operations stopped in Yemen because of several things, but mainly both UAE and Saudi Arabia's main initiative was using the air power. This had a kind of limited effect. Okay, it was fine, and they rolled back the Houthis to their initial positions, but they couldn't kind of go further, and there was a kind of balance between the forces of Yemen and between the Houthi forces. And on November 4, 2017, a Houthi ballistic missile attack happened on Saudi soil. The Saudis quickly said that this was a kind of derogation to the United Nations Security Council resolution, which foresaw an embargo of arms. And also they started a blockade for 20 days on Yemen. And during this blockade, there was a huge kind of outcry about what happens, because they thought that the coalition was trying to strangle Yemen with this blockade. So they were trying to kill the Yemenis, the Houthis, by making them hungry, if you may. Then the Saudis relieved this blockade based on these reactions, but there was another kind of mechanism put in place. So there was this United Nations verification and inspection mechanism, which controlled the ports of Yemen, what goes in and outside. And the Saudis and UAE were part of this inspection mechanism, and they added additional layers of control in order to make sure that no weapon arrives to Houthis. And on 4th of December 2017, I had told you about this coalition between Houthis and Saleh. Saleh was shot and killed by Houthi forces outside Sana'a. Then on June 13, 2018, Operation Golden Victory started to reclaim Hodeidah from the Houthis. Again, the most important thing about this operation of Golden Victory is that Hodeidah, with its two main ports, is responsible for nearly 80% of whatever comes to Yemen, because even before the war, Yemen was not a self-sufficient country, and it mainly imports its nutrients, like the food and everything, from outside. So when you suffocate, if you make a kind of war, and if there's a kind of harm to these ports, it's not going to affect only that city, not Hodeidah, but it's going to affect the whole Yemen, because inside Yemen you're not going to be able to get food and other things. For that reason, UN quickly said there was a huge, as I said, reaction to this operation. UAE and Saudi Arabia decided to make an operational pause and to see how UN can come in and intervene in this fight, how it is going to happen. But as you're going to see, this happened in June 2018, and in 5th of July 2018, Houthis targeted two Saudi crude oil tankers passing through Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This was a kind of showing the force and saying, look, we have something to say on the table. 26th of July, Houthis claimed to have hit Abu Dhabi airport, a major transportation hub connecting flights between East and West. I don't know if you have traveled towards that part of the world. It's really, Abu Dhabi airport is really a major hub. Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and most kind of flights towards Southeast, like Eastern Asia and so, have a kind of connection in there. So it was really an important event at the time. And after General Mattis from US threatened Houthis to forcibly kind of hit them, Houthis were kind of fine to come onto a negotiation table and sort of find an agreement. So on 13th of December, there was an agreement in Stockholm. And accordingly, the city of Hodeidah and the port of Salif and Ras Issa, these are the main two ports in Hodeidah, were going to be managed by the United Nations and the locals. An executive mechanism on activating the prisoner exchange agreement, and also a statement of understanding on ties were two other elements of the agreement. But the agreement was more like an effort to fix the problem but it was more a kind of PR work because at the time the UN special envoy Martin Griffiths was under really stress, and he had to find a solution to the problem one way or another. And there was this US threat to find a solution. What they did was they agreed somewhat on something, but there was nothing clear on how this would kind of play out on the ground. So what they did, even until now, there is no really a clear advance on the items that were agreed in the Stockholm Agreement. And this is one of the things you see on the media and everything. They made some progress on prisoner exchange. They exchanged several prisoners, and about 1,000, I guess. There was like 6 months ago, and a mutual kind of exchange of prisoners, but there's really not much progress. I'll come to that later on. Beginning on 28th of January 2018, there's a wrong, this is a mistake, sorry. I need to delete that. I don't know why it is made there. Fast forward to 2019, in July, United Arab Emirates decided to draw its forces from Yemen. It was a major decision, and it came after the Houthis hit two ports one airport and a port in United Arab Emirates. And for them, if you're a country like United Arab Emirates, if the oil, if 70% of your economy doesn't depend on oil-related products, like UAE has very well differentiated its portfolios on economical kind of terms. It has major incomes from transportation, from tourism, and from this kind of things. They're not only dependent on oil. It's a very important threat if you start to get rockets or drones from Yemen, because once your reputation is hit, it's not going to be able to find more kind of flights that's going to reconnect from Abu Dhabi or Dubai airports, and these kind of things are really major risks for UAE. And in 27th of August 2019, tensions escalate again in southern Yemen because of the secessionists. And basically, in August 2019, the secessionists, as they call themselves, STC, Southern Transitional Council, they made a coup and they took control of Aden and Zinjibar. By the way, this Zinjibar is the city where the President Hadi is from. So it has a kind of symbolic meaning for them. And tensions escalated. And when the government forces tried to react to this takeover, UAE forces bombed from air the forces, legitimate government's forces. And in 5th of November 2019, there was a power sharing agreement between Riyadh, between STC and legal government, legitimate government, brokered by Saudis. And on 14th of September 2000, yes, there was this archaic and Christ. Sorry, I'm passing this part. In order to make the presentation more readable, I cut and paste them to several different slides, and I guess I have mixed them up a little bit. In the 1st of March, Houthi forces captured the city of Al Hazm, the capital of Al Jawf province, during the 2020 Al Jawf offensive. So if we fast forward to 1st of March, we see that, can you see the map on the right side? And here you're going to see that below here, you're going to see where the hydrocarbon resources are located in Yemen. They are basically in Marib and Shabwa region. And the initial kind of intention of Houthi is to keep these former northern Yemen republics border lines is now shifting a little bit. They want to put hold onto these hydrocarbon resources in eastern Yemen. So what we see on the ground right now, when we come to 1st of March in the chronology, you see that they kind of focus and concentrate their forces for a kind of offensive towards these hydrocarbon resources. And on the 8th of April, the Saudi-led coalition announced a 2-week ceasefire because of this coronavirus. The UN had made a call and saying, please stop this war, and this coronavirus is really important. You need to take precautions, and we need to take precautions at the same time. Let's put this fight aside for a while and take a precaution against this. And Saudi-led coalition also made appeals to the Houthis to reach an agreement, but there was no agreement at the time. And after 2 week ceasefire, the attacks started again. This year, on June the 2nd, there was a kind of donor event co-hosted by Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, an organization for humanitarian assistance, UN's branch, and they were only able to collect $1.35 billion to support Yemen and the humanitarian kind of assistance there. But the target was 2.4, and they fell short of 1.64 billion to maintain these life-saving activities. And 18 million of the Yemenis are dependent on international humanitarian aid. On 14th of June 2020, STC withdrew from Riyadh Agreement. And on 24th of June, STC seized full control of Socotra. And this was basically a coup because they took one part of the island there. So right now we are here in terms of the conflict. As you see, these are the social base, if you may, of STC here in Aden. This is where the Houthis control. These are the parts that are loyal to the legitimate government, if you may, and basically, as you see, the conflict areas, the red parts, are in the peripheries of those control zones. So there is a kind of a constant competition between the sides to expand and extend the current areas that they control. There are several different aspects of this war that needs attention. First of all, we need to understand that in like the US forms the 34 is responsible for 34% of the arms sales globally, and 18% of its arms goes to Saudi Arabia. It's an important dynamic that we need to take into consideration. And UAE is responsible for 7.4. And if you go to see those countries, you're going to see that Saudi Arabia, it's here on the line, sorry. And you're going to see that the first major kind of arms seller to Saudi Arabia is USA, the second is UK, and third is France. If you go and check UAE, the second kind of major partner of the coalition, you're going to see that USA is again like the major responsible. 80% of its arms sales comes from USA, 13% comes from France, and as a third, like Italy comes the third. Sorry, this percentages are not right. So this is one aspect that we need to take into consideration and see. Another important kind of aspect of the war and the main reaction towards this coalition of Saudi Arabia is their skill in conducting this war. This is a kind of statistics on how air raids by Saudi Arabia and UAE has fared on the ground. You're going to see that the military targets that the coalition has targeted comprise only 37% of the targets. 31% are non-military and 32 are unknown. Among this non-military, you have like water depots, hospitals, regular houses, roads. So in the deterioration of the situation in Yemen, this coalition, even though they came to stop the war, they have a lot of responsibility. And this is also a kind of major source of reactions that they get globally. So I am going to stop this show here, and I want to talk about different aspects and different kind of actors in the war. So first of all, I need to say that the main reason for this civil war in Yemen, the source is not external. The dynamics of the war come from inside. So there is a kind of Houthi group which wants to have a kind of a major role in governance of the state, and which wants to kind of break away from this unitarian government, unitarian Yemen, and control zones that were formerly governed by northern Yemen. They have a certain version of Islam that they represent. They have a certain understanding of Islam, but there are wrong things about the way the things have been reflected, or the way the things are framed. First of all, the Houthis are Zaydis, but not all these Zaydis are Houthis. So Houthis is a political movement that has its basis among the Zaydis, but not Zaydis are supporting the Houthis in their kind of this endeavor. Second, there's a major perception that the Zaydis are Shiites. This is really contestable because the Zaydi branch of Shiites, as they call it, they go and pray in the locals' kind of mosques, and the locals go and pray in their mosques, in Zaydi's mosques, because like the normal Shiites, if you don't, they claim that the Ali should have been the first kind of caliph, and the other caliphs that we know, the first, second, and third one, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Osman, they did injustice, and they don't see them well. Like for them, they are really. It depends on which sects we are talking about, but they see them as infidels, the Shiites. But in Zaydis, this is not the case. They believe that Ali and his two sons, Hassan and Hussein, should have been the first caliphs. That's right. But they don't think that those first three caliphs were wrong. So they think that there was a kind of problem in interpretation, but that's fine. They don't kind of, they don't have a very harsh position towards them. And as the second, they have a kind of interesting understanding. They believe that they do descend from the Prophet's lineage, and they believe that the government should be formed from people who are coming from that lineage. But this doesn't kind of give, as the normal Shiites, they don't think that there's a kind of imamate, a kind of religious head who has to govern the state, who has a major, like a final say on the governance issues. So in two kind of aspects, they differ from regular Shiites, if you may. And but if you look at the media, and if you look at the way they have been framed, like they are framed as like an extension of the Shiites in Iran, which is not exactly true. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and go to the screen to see if we have any questions and so. And I'm going to. Okay. I see this question. Can you address these sectarians very briefly? We do not know those guys you mentioned. So I'm talking about Zaydis. and these are framed. Houthis are Zaydis. Zaydis are one of three kind of major. They are known as one of three major branches of Shiite. One is 12 imams, 12ers, as they call them, and these are majorly in Iran. And you have Ismailis, which are in North Africa and Lebanon to some sort, and you have Zaydis, which are mainly in Yemen. So this is three kind of branches, sub-branches of Shiism. And Zaydis, as I said, they are very close to Shafid branch of Orthodox Islam, and it's really hard to frame them or categorize them as Shiites because they do not show the major characteristics of 12ers or Ismailis. I was going to come to there. Why do we call Yemen civil war as a proxy war? This is a very good question. Because of COVID-19 causing states people to stop fighting and looking for aid. Do you think this helps to create peace? Yes, these are very good questions. So in order to answer these questions, I want to go into who has what kind of take in this war. Why did coalition come into play? And who plays what role in Yemen? You might know this. There is this collective goods theory. Have you touched upon this before? Does anyone know? I don't know. This is a question to you. It's collective goods theory. You can write to the chat box if yes or no. Okay. The main issue in Yemen is like you have many power centers. You have many people who thinks that they're going to govern the state very well. But in collective goods theory, I'm going to first come to collective goods theory, then make my point on this. So let's say the government thinks that there's too much pollution in the air, and say that everybody should put that kind of filter to their exhaust in order to reduce the pollution in the air. And this exhaust is really expensive. So the issue is that you have to go and buy this exhaust pipe or filter in order to bring down this pollution down. But if everybody thinks that if I don't put this filter, who is going to realize this? Who is going to understand? And what difference does my action make in the kind of total pollution? What happens if I don't? And if everybody kind of makes a free ride, in 1 month or 2 months or in a period of time, you're going to see that there's no difference in the pollution in the air. So you need to have some authority who is going to enforce what you said as a kind of a rule, or if it's a recommendation or whatever it is, you need a kind of an authority who is going to enforce that. In Yemen, the situation is so complicated that nobody thinks that whatever they do good is going to change the situation. So everybody's trying to maximize their own marginal benefits. That's the real problem in Yemen. Although you see that there is a war and the people are suffering, you see that the people are trying to still kind of increase their power base, increase their the main actors, increase their role and in the governance, in the power structure, in order to get more material kind of benefits. We can talk about a kleptocracy even in this case. So this is the main problem in Yemen. Coming to the power structures in Yemen, internally, as I said, there is this Houthi group in the north which wants to govern the former northern Yemen. In south, there's STC, the Southern Transitional Council, which was built in 2007, which wants to govern the country, which want to secede from the north and go back to pre-1990 period in terms of governance, and they want to govern. As I said, both sides have this legitimacy problem. In the north, Houthis do not represent the northerners. Zaydis are comprised of only, as far as I know, remember, 10% of the total population. And if you think about those percentages that I told you, like three quarters of the population lives in north, you're going to understand that Houthis are not a kind of they don't have a very big social base. But within this conflict, in time, they learn how to govern, and they develop skills, and they start to fill out government offices by their own men, and they kind of start to learn these things. If we go back to Southerners, the same issue applies there. Like their kind of power base is around Aden and Lach area. They have a kind of social base there, but they do not represent the whole South. Like there are very recent kind of explanations and statements by different governments in Shabwa especially, and like towards the east of the country, you're going to see that the people are not happy and they don't want to see the STC govern them. They don't want to take any kind of side in this war. They want a united Yemen, and they see that a united Yemen is going to provide more prosperity in the future. So both sides in their kind of bid to power, they show some kind of skills, but they do not have this legitimacy base. They do not represent the whole areas that they want to control. This is internally. Externally, if you look at, you're going to have like two layers. You have, first of all, the regional kind of partners or regional actors. Iran is certainly a part, but Iran's engagement in this fight in Yemen is going back to, as I mentioned before, in the war after 2003. Uh, at that time, President Saleh, in order to take harsh precautions against the Houthis, he securitized the situation. So what he did was, he said, these Houthis are Shiites, they are extensions of Iran, and then he took like hard precautions. And actually, in 2009, in the fifth round, Saudi Arabia made its first cross-border operation in Yemen and helped the Yemeni government to overcome the fight, overcome the Houthis. The issue is that the Houthis in these Sada wars between 2003 and 2010, they developed skills, and each time like they learned how to fight a little bit better, and they bettered themselves. This is we were talking about external. So externally, you have like three major. Iran, as I said, when we come to Iran, so after this 2003-2010 Sada wars, Iran started to better communicate with Houthis because they were labeled as extensions of Iran, and now this created a kind of pretext to develop relationships. And after that, we see that Houthis sent people to Hezbollah camps to get military training in Lebanon, and also with Iran, they kind of developed a relationship. So this framing caused the reality on the ground. And Iran wants to bother Saudi Arabia because there is this regional competition between the both sides. Like there was a piece in the media. It showed like a simple Houthi drone can be built by $5,000. You bring the pieces together and build a drone, which is going to go and explode itself on Saudi soil. But in order to intercept that drone, Saudi Arabia has to make an investment of $5 million because one Patriot missile costs as much. But it's not only that. Actually, with that thing, Saudi Arabia has to kind of build a whole fleet of fighter jets to intercept them, and also has to buy very expensive Patriot missile systems and everything. So with very little investment, Iran has the potential through the Houthis bother Saudi Arabia and make it invest more in its own defense, which is useless money. This is the money that should, in a normal state, should go to investment in different things like technology and That's it. So this is Iran. When we come to Saudi Arabia and UAE, their calculations are a little bit different. For this, maybe I should share the map, which is going to be better. So this is the map. First of all, for Saudi Arabia, Yemen is just a neighbor in the south, and Saudi Arabia has a kind of population, a Shiite population in its south. So for them coming to contact with Zaydis and this kind of coming together is not a good thing. It doesn't want this. It wants stability. And for Saudi Arabia, at the same time, they do use here this part of this trade to transfer the oil that they sell, and this also they want to keep this place, this part of the world, the Red Sea, secure and safe for its trade kind of connections. That's quite natural and understandable. For UAE, on the other hand, UAE has been building a kind of naval bases here in Eritrea, Djibouti, and in order to kind of build a kind of secure trade line for itself, it also wants to, its ambition is a little bit higher. UAE wants to become a major regional power in the region. So for it, like from the very beginning, it was very clear. UAE wants to control this Socotra Island, and also here you have one Perim Island, which is in the middle of this strait, and UAE wants to control these places. This is another thing, and but UAE plays the game a little bit in an interesting way. Here, as we told about two major kind of partners of the coalition, we need to also understand their internal calculations, which is the major source of this latest conflict that we see. For UAE, UAE doesn't have a kind of preference for a united Yemen. UAE doesn't care about that. What UAE cares about is to have a government which is going to support this, which is going to give it bases in Aden, in Socotra, in Perim, and which is going to be favorable to itself. So this is UAE's kind of calculation. For Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, a united Yemen is important. Saudi Arabia doesn't want the Houthis or the northerners to build a new state, which is going to be a threat to itself, which is going to, after being built up, going to make trade with Iran freely, which is going to give, like, think about if you were Saudi Arabia and if there was a kind of fractured Yemen, and if there was a state here in northern Yemen, which is recognized by the international community, like this country could easily give like ports and bases to Iran, because now we're talking about a free state, no? So for Saudi Arabia, a united Yemen is something integral and something very important. So it's not going to allow Yemen to be fractured. This is two kind of important difference in understanding between Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. As the things evolve, we now understand that there was no strict kind of understanding between two coalition partners, between Saudi Arabia and UAE on this point. And as the things evolved, we now start to see this kind of conflicts between the two partners more clearly. So this is UAE and Saudi Arabia. As regards the international society, USA, UK, and other major friends especially, for them the war is not something wanted, but at the same time they make profit out of this war. Honestly, they sell well to both countries who want to counter UAE, and this way they benefit from this conflict one way or another. That's how I want to say. I'm not saying that they are happy but it's not a conspiracy theory. But at the same time, they didn't stop making trade with these countries. Like there was a decision in Europe not to sell weapons to UAE and Saudi Arabia because of what they did in Yemen, especially after the killing of Khashoggi. I don't know if you remember, there was a Saudi journalist that was killed in Turkey by within the embassy of Saudi Arabia in Istanbul, and then the European countries started to take precaution, and they said we're not going to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. But we don't see, it's not the case for UK, it's not the case for France, and it's not the case for US. So these are the major kind of things. And this part of the world is not so important for USA, UK, and France because they have more urgent problems like in Syria and Libya. The crisis is really important and it has evolved and that requires their immediate action. But Yemen is a little bit far away from everything. Like Yemen doesn't attract the attention of NATO, doesn't attract the attention of EU, and doesn't attract the attention of these major powers. So what happens in Yemen mainly remains in Yemen, and that's a pity. Let me go back to the questions and see what we have. So that's how we call it a proxy war. It is a proxy war, you could tell it, but it was not initial like that. It evolved to become a proxy war. I hope I have answered the question about who are the major external actors and dynamics in the region. The next question, when the military pulls out from aiding fighting states, do they do anything beforehand to prepare for bigger conflicts? Yeah. This question is a little bit tricky. Like when the coalition started this intervention in Yemen, their initial thought was that they were going to quickly roll back Houthi forces back to where they were, but they couldn't. One of the major problems here is that there's a coalition that has been forced to counter Houthi forces, but it's not able. In UAE side, there's not enough men to do this. In Saudi Arabia, there's not enough skilled soldiers to do this either. Even I showed you the percentages of the targeting, you're going to see that, you saw that. You do not see that kind of commitment. But what they did in Yemen is really interesting. UAE started to build forces which are aligned to itself. It started to pay their salaries. Their name is Security Belt Forces. And through these Security Belt Forces, literally UAE generated forces to fight Houthis. And they provided some of their soldiers as advisors and to control the issues in the state. Saudi Arabia directly involved its forces, again, in a kind of, not in larger scale, but in small scale. And both states engaged Sudanese soldiers to brought Sudanese soldiers into Yemen to fight alongside government forces. And they kind of separated the influence zones. UAE was to take the shore in the west, coming down from Mocha up till Hudaydah and so, and Saudis more took the northwestern Yemen and southern Yemen to help government forces. And but as I said, we now see a kind of culmination point. In military, this term refers to a state where two conflicting forces have equal forces and neither side can overcome the other. And this way the conflict becomes longer in terms of time and it becomes more and more, how we could say, painful for both sides. Now, one of the, you might be following, there are like bicameral kind of opposition towards Trump saying you shouldn't help Saudi Arabia, we shouldn't export arms to Saudi Arabia for the war in Yemen. The war in Yemen is very bad, and so on and so forth. And Trump administration's argument is that there is a culmination point, and if we do not give them arms, they're going to be more weak, and the Houthis are going to take over. So this is something that we need to take into consideration. So coming back to this question, I think initial calculation was that they were going to be able to roll them back, the Houthi forces. I'm talking about coalition. But now, as they saw that the war becomes pricier, both Saudi Arabia and UAE are trying to kind of exit the war because for them also it becomes really, really costly. Saudi Arabia really allocates funds for this war, and UAE, as I said, its commercial kind of interest has already been hurt. And as far as I know, as far as I see from the reports, there was a backdoor kind of agreement with Houthis that UAE is going to pull its forces out of Yemen, and Houthis are not going to target UAE soil with missiles anytime again. And we see that, like, after UAE pulled out of this coalition, pulled out its forces, not totally, but with great percent from Yemen, we haven't seen a Houthi targeting of UAE soil. So it looks like it's true. Yesterday, we watched the conditions that lead ISIS to rise. The conditions were corruption, suppression against minority group, a failed government, etc. We can see that the conditions in Yemen is more or less the same. In this dire situation, do you think that Yemen will also nest for terror organizations? I mean, it's not something, we're not talking about future, it already is. Like Al-Qaeda in Arabic Peninsula, AKAP, is already a force, already something that lives on Yemeni soil. And as you said, the conditions are quite amenable to produce this result. As I said twice, in 2011 and 2012, AKAP declared a kind of Islamic Emirate in Yemen. But the issue is that after Trump administration took over, this I don't know if you follow the files, but CENTCOM conducts operations inside Yemen. This year, they killed the former emir of AKAP in Yemen, Rimi, Qasim al-Rimi, and their kind of operations continue. The US forces conduct operations together with UAE, especially pinpoint targeted spot operations to kill leader cadre in the organization, and also to bring down the morale in the group, because now AKAP is dealing with this internal, how they call, like, informers, like how this Rimi was killed, who knew his place, how it was, how this info was given to CENTCOM, how it was passed to them, is a major issue within the organization. And there has been killings inside. They killed the people that they thought were giving this information to US forces and to the government. So since Trump administration is power, we can say that AKAP has really lost power in Yemen. But it's right. The conditions are ripe for emergence of such terrorist groups. Totally right. In the environment of major actors' clash of interest, how can the international community address the situation in Yemen? Yes, that's really a very good question. I don't know if the courses within the course you have seen this responsibility to protect concept. It was shelved like 10 years ago in 2011 after the Libya war. But there was this concept of responsibility to protect. So let's say if you have a dictator who is killing and who is creating much agony on his own population, international society should take the responsibility at hand, and intervene in this situation. This was the general concept, but we saw that it got out of the control. And if you look at the Stockholm Agreement and the 3-4 weeks before how it happened, you're going to see that General Mattis was quite clear. And he said, enough is enough. we don't have any more patience. And then you see that Houthis said, okay, we're going to go to the negotiation table, we're going to agree on things. But later on, that pressure was taken off from the Yemens. So, as I said, the dynamics are local. There are too many carrots for the parties that are fighting within Yemen, because they are bidding for greater power, for governance, for this and that. That's fine. But there is no stick in this thing. So if you think in a level of analysis, like level by level, at local level, at national level in Yemen, there are carrots, but there are no sticks. At regional level, again, there are no carrots, but there are sticks. Like there is this coalition who is trying to fight the Houthis, but the stick was not forceful enough to bring peace to the country. So it helped a little bit to roll back the Houthis, but it was not enough to make them agree on something, put them in a kind of agreement. At global level, there is nearly no kind of stick, and that's the main problem. So my argument is that I wrote this before in one of my assessments. International actors should actively take responsibility on this. United Nations Security Council has certainly a role in this, and they should enforce something like it could be sanctions, it could be kind of use of force and so. But neither side has a kind of fear of anything, because whatever they do, they go away with it. So they have there is no kind of stick in this thing. There is no kind of motivation. There is no kind of power which is going to regulate the relationship inside, and there is no kind of a force which is going to say, look, if you do this, you're going to get this. So you should agree on an agreement. You should agree on a peace plan or something. So this is how I see it. Yes. And as I said, the power base of the government is really shaky. The government is dying in famine, but you see that the ministers of the legitimate government are living in exile in Saudi Arabia, and from time to time they share pictures from their meetings, from their encounters with other embassies, other representatives of other countries, and the luxury is everywhere. So they call them Yemenis call them ministers of hotel ministers. So you have ministers who represent the legitimate government and who do not represent the situation in Yemen, if you may. What can be short-term, long-term solutions for Yemen? Yes, a good question. So, first of all, the coalition members between themselves, they should agree. This is the primary kind of requisite, because even though they both UAE and Saudi Arabia look from outside as if they're trying to do good in Yemen, they do things that have like cross purposes. Like I told you about how the forces, legitimate government forces, were trying to get back Aden, and it was UAE forces that bombed them. And in the last case, like in Socotra, when the forces aligned with UAE, security belt forces tried to take control of the island, Socotra Island. Saudi Arabian forces were there too, and they just watched. They didn't intervene. So there are plans outside the major plans. So there is an agreement between UAE and Saudi Arabia, and even Yemenis don't know about this, as it becomes clear on how the events play out on the ground. So this is one thing. And the second thing is The government of Yemen, this legitimate government, has to be, first of all, transparent, and second, it shouldn't be it should be more effective on the ground. You cannot rule a country from outside. Like, there are parts that are under government control. I think they can go back to Yemen. They don't have to rule from Aden, but they can go and they can rule the country from there. I don't think this is an impossibility, and they should share the conditions that the Yemenis are sharing. I didn't mention this, but there are many reports about how the hydrocarbon, the incomes coming from hydrocarbons, the licenses that are being delivered are delivered on the basis of this government's profit or to their relatives, or this kind of thing. Nepotism comes into play, and bribe comes into play. So everybody's trying to fill his pockets, and in this kind of setting, it's not possible to say I'm a government, to claim legitimacy. And there's an opportunity right now. Hadi somewhat got 99% of the votes when he came to power, and his age is really forward. He's more than 80 as far as I know. And if he dies for some reason, then we're going to see a very big fight, because the base of legitimacy is in his person. And if something happens to him, then we're going to see further problems about that. So I think in the short term, as in the case of General Mattis, as I said, international society should come together, think that this Yemeni situation is really important, and they should apply some pressure on all sides of the conflict to reach an agreement, somewhat agreement. In the long term, I don't think you're going to be able to find a solution, because whenever one side is stronger, it's going to try to dominate the others, because this now becomes a kind of tradition in the country. And I don't think in the long term a solution may be found. I mean, in the long term, solution is based on how much you make the sides happy. And from the way I see it, it's not really so possible to make everyone happy in this setting, because STC's bid is for the whole South, which it doesn't represent. In the North, Houthis want to take the whole kind of state, which is not possible. If the compromise that is going to be reached the next day is, first of all, I don't see a unitarian Yemen possible in the future. So we're going to see divisions. And if this new kind of state, this new fractured state, makes everyone happy, we could see some sort of solution. But in the long term, it's really hard, because STC bids for this hydrocarbon-rich areas too, and it becomes really complicated. It's not going to happen. Thank you very much. Thank you. This is all from me, and I hope I could answer your questions. Some of your questions doesn't have really a clear-cut answer, because the situation is really complicated. From time to time, I speak to Yemenis, and I ask the same questions to them, and I say, what do you think, how the solution could come? Even they are like blocked. They see, we cannot see how it's going to evolve. We cannot see how it's going to play out, how the solution should come. So I hope this clarifies everything, and thank you for taking me today, and it was a pleasure for me.
Thank you, Mr. Sultan, for elucidating the situation both in Yemen and the Middle East as well. It was an eye-opening for us to learn the internal and external actors and the several dynamics coming together to create the perfect storm for a conflict. We are honored by your evaluations. Thank you.
It was my honor. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.